Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk. This year celebrating 20 years of thematic walking tours of Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director for the company, and thank you so much for joining us on this first episode. Every 2 weeks, we will be bringing you conversations with interesting people on the paranormal, dark history, tourism, science, or really anything we think would make for a great discussion. We definitely want our listeners to be involved with the show, so please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com, to find all our social media links there so you can keep up to date on upcoming shows and guests. We also suggest subscribing to the show on iTunes, and if you're so kind enough to leave us a 5-star review, that would be appreciated as well. On our first show, we're going to be speaking with Glen Shackleton, the founder of the Haunted Walk. He's going to be sharing some of his insights and experiences on over 20 years in the ghost tour business. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I think we got most of them in, and there were really some thoughtful ones that were posed. A few stumpers for Glen for sure. Before we get into the interview, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Glen and his accomplishments. Glen did found the Haunted Walk of Kingston in 1995, expanding to Ottawa in 1996, and more recently opening the Haunted Walk of Toronto in 2013. He's the past president of the Bytown Museum, as well as Attractions Ontario. He has sat on the board of directors for Ottawa Tourism and the Historical Society of Ottawa, and was named one of Ottawa Business Journal's Top 40 Under 40 in 2010. Haunted Walks Inc. is Canada's largest walking tour company, with over 70 tour guides spread between its 3 locations. To date, over 500,000 people have experienced a haunted walk. And now, to our interview with Glen Shackleton, founder of the Haunted Walk. Today we are joined by Glen Shackleton, founder of the Haunted Walks, and who we admirably refer to as our fearless leader. And thanks, Glen, so much for joining us today on the very first episode of Haunted Talks.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
We got a bunch of great questions for you, many of them from our followers through social media. But first, I think we all just want to give you a note of congratulations. As I understand, this is the 20th anniversary season for the company.
That's right. It's been 20 years since those first tours in May of 1995, when I had no idea what I was doing.
We'll see if that's changed as we ask you some questions as we go. The first question, which comes up quite often, I imagine you've heard it very frequently, is how did you come up with the idea for the Haunted Walk?
Well, I was a history student at Queen's University and spending a term abroad in England, and so noticed that there were a lot of tours of this type. The one that I went on in particular was in York, and it wasn't the Haunted Walk of York, but it was a ghost tour in York, and I just thought it was such an amazing way to get to learn something about a city, get to see a place that, you know, you might not be comfortable walking around at night on your own, but getting to hear a little bit about the history, the great ghost stories, and I thought this would be a great thing to bring back home. It really wasn't something that was very commonly done here at the time. Walking tours were still pretty rare, and ghost tours were even more rare. But I thought it would make a great summer job for myself.
And what was that first season like? What was the response to the concept in Kingston when you unveiled the Haunted Walk? People
were really enthusiastic about it once they got an idea of what it was I was trying to do. I definitely had some people that were a little bit confused about the idea, but I remember one incident where I had a lady come up and say to me when I was standing there with my sign advertising walking tours for the evening and saying, "Walking tours? You want me to pay to just walk around? I can do that myself, thank you very much." And I wished her a good evening, but there were a lot of people that were very enthusiastic about the tours. In fact, right in the first few weeks of doing the tour, we got a front page article in the Kingston Whig Standard, and I'd say that's really where we got started in when it really picked up in terms of people coming out on the tours.
And what would you say are the biggest differences between kind of the Haunted Walk in 1995 and what the Haunted Walk is doing and is about today?
Well, I think there's a lot of differences. We have a big team for sure now compared to before, but at the same time, and I think certainly in terms of the scale, things are a lot different. But I really think we have stuck to the same principles that of really trying to create something extraordinary for people. That I think it was true in 1995, and it's still true now. So the scale of things has changed. The amount of people involved in our team has certainly changed significantly. Certainly, how well known we are has changed a lot, but I think in a lot of ways we're certainly still the same company that we were then.
And was it just yourself doing the tours that first season? And did you have any background in tour guiding when you started up?
I didn't have any background in tour guiding when I started. In fact, I was quite terrified of public speaking at the time. So I was really not 100% sure that I could even do this. But I sucked it up and decided that this was something that would be a lot of fun, and certainly learned to enjoy the public speaking side of it very much. I also had a lot of help from my brother Craig, as well as my girlfriend at the time, now my wife Jackie, who both did tours with me in that first season. But we were a very small crew, but it was a very exciting time for sure with the tour just getting off the ground.
Tessa Vega had a good question for you on Facebook, I thought, and she's interested to know if you have a favorite story between all the various stories that you tell or are told on the tours.
Tessa, I think that's a really great question. It's also a really difficult question for me to answer because all three cities have their own kind of unique character. There's so many great stories that are all so different from each other. You have a great story like our Gatineau ghost story here in Ottawa. That's a very sad, kind of melancholy story, to truly terrifying stories like the Queen's Ghetto House in Kingston. Some of the newer stories in Toronto that are really, really chilling stories. But I think if you ask what was my favorite to research or to be able to develop for the tour, I'd have to say that two that really come to mind are Chalmers Church in Kingston, as well as the Teachers College, the normal school here in Ottawa. And the reason I'd say that those would be a couple of my favorites is just because it was one of those things when doing the research where I was able to get so many corroborating pieces of evidence and so many witnesses that it really just made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I remember with Chalmers Church, for example, being told by the organist all these stories that he had heard from various people who had played at the organ there, that they all had a sense there was some kind of a presence that was trying to get around behind them that meant them harm in some way when they were playing at the organ. And he gave me some contact information. I got some numbers of some people who had played there, 20 years earlier. And I started phoning these women, largely women that had played at the organ there. And it was just so bizarre to have each of them say to me, I just said I was doing some research on Chalmers and I was wondering if they ever had anything strange happen there when they were at the organ. To have each of them then relay their stories in almost the exact same detail was just mind-blowing to me. Similarly with the Teachers College in Ottawa, being able to find these stories of the security guards seeing this ghostly apparition going back and forth between the classrooms, Miss Bolton, one of the old teachers, and then finding an old yearbook that described this exact same practice taking place, and it was the year that Miss Bolton retired from teaching, and that was one of her innovations, was to push for them to change this practice. So, when you find, to me, the perfect ghost story it unites the really cool, bone-chilling story with some great historical evidence that you can tie right into that story. Those are the ones that, to me, are the ones that I love the most because of my love of history as well as the ghost stories.
Now, you've been speaking about kind of the weight of the evidence. Is there any building or site that you feature on the tours that you feel is perhaps the most credible haunting, where the evidence is just overwhelming? You mentioned Chalmers, you mentioned the Teachers College. Any other spots that you think, there's a lot of people kind of saying the very similar things about what's happening there?
Well, certainly I'd have to say that one would be the Distillery District in general in Toronto. You have so many great stories that have come from all different kinds of groups that have done filming there, different groups that know nothing about the ghost stories, but yet report some of the exact same things, like a gentleman that they see when they're doing their filming, and often has the same description that we've had different theories of who he could be, but it's really neat when you get people that are all from different backgrounds that end up having very much the same kind of encounters. Similarly, the Ottawa jail hostel is one of those places where, it's internationally famous for being haunted, but one of the great things about the jail hostel is there's always new people staying there from all around the world, many of whom have no idea that it has this reputation, don't know anything about the ghosts, but then describe a lot of the same kinds of things happening to them. So those places are really neat, where you have a lot of different kinds of people, and in the distillery you have so many different businesses that have very similar encounters that you can kind of tie together. And very similarly with the jail hostel, where you have all these different visitors and staff, some of whom know nothing whatsoever about the rumors of the haunting, who then have encounters for themselves and report the same types of things to the front desk.
Now, Valerie Dablitz asks a question in the same vein. She's wondering if you have ever seen an apparition or a ghost with your own eyes.
Valerie, it's really a rare and lucky thing to be able to see something in one of the haunted places. I mean, after doing so many research and interviewing so many witnesses, the stories where we get people who've actually seen an apparition are really rare and amazing. I myself have seen one ghost, I would say. I have seen the image of what we call the wandering ghost at Fort Henry when I was there doing some filming with a film crew, and I saw a man walking along right underneath the scaffolding in the parade square at a time when we knew it was a closed set. We knew there was absolutely nobody down there. We started thinking it was the security guard, so I kind of alerted the sound crew to the fact that I'd seen this gentleman walking across the parade square. We went out and did a whole search. We called the security guard and found that he was still at his station. So it was at quite a distance, and therefore I wouldn't say I necessarily would say that I've seen an apparition up close in the way that you may be asking, but I have definitely had plenty of encounters that I find difficult to explain. I have a rather skeptical nature for the most part. I mean, when I got into this because I loved ghost stories, but also because I was a real history buff, and I thought they really tied those two things I thought were, nicely tied together. Although I have a slightly skeptical nature, I have had encounters that I can say that I absolutely cannot explain. Everything from having been at the Bytown Museum and heard footsteps following me up the stairs, to having a door almost shaking off its hinges right in front of my face, hearing loud banging on the door right in front of me at the jail hostel. So I'm certainly no stranger to having some encounters that were very convincing, and certainly it certainly scared me did a pretty good job of making it hard to sleep at night after these things had happened. But I haven't, I'm not one of the people who have seen something really up close and personal as far as one of our ghosts, although certainly many of the places that we visit have had those types of encounters at them.
And do you find over the years, does your perspective change at all in visiting these haunted places? Do you kind of get accustomed to, going to death row at the jail or deep into the tunnels at the fort? Or do you still find it kind of, every time you go there, you kind of get the hairs on the back of your neck standing up a bit?
I would say it's both true that you do get used to these places, and certainly you get comfortable with these haunted places that we visit, but it's also still true that sometimes I can be a complete chicken, and especially sometimes I can surprise myself by just all of a sudden getting deeply spooked out by a place. Probably Fort Henry is the most notorious one for that. It's just something about that place with all of the windows and just the sense of the history of the place. But every once in a while when I'm at Fort Henry for an event and I find myself in the parade square by myself and realize that I'm all alone down there, I can tell you that it certainly quickens my step to get out of the place. And I'm not ashamed to say I've even started running at some point when I was leaving the fort. But that being said, it is kind of funny. We do get used to these spaces a little bit. The old jail hostel, for example, when getting it ready for Halloween on a number of occasions, I've been doing it with coworkers and sort of seen a strange look in their face, and at first kind of asked them what was wrong, and then realized that they're actually just scared and that it kind of forgot that we were in a pretty scary place because I've spent so much time in there. But, I'm not immune to being scared of these places. In some ways, it almost makes it worse because it gets your defenses down. So you're not going in there kind of anticipating being scared. So then when something happens, like a door slams shut or something weird that you can't explain, I think in some ways it's like a sucker punch, I guess. You react more strongly to the thing happening because you've let your defenses down a bit. So, you certainly, I guess, get a little bit braver, no doubt. But at the same time, it almost makes it easier for the real, truly scary stuff to really get to you.
Another interesting question we have from Kathy Young-Simons is she's interested to know if there was a particular story that was very difficult in the sense of researching it or presenting it in a tactful way. Or is there a particular story that you really had to work with for a while to kind of figure out the best approach to use?
Kathy, that's a great question, and thanks for asking it. I think when it comes to the stories that were most difficult to research, I'd certainly have to say the Ottawa jail hostel was probably one of those. Part of it is because of the privacy rules around a place that was still used as a prison up until the 1970s. It can be very difficult to get reliable information on that place because a lot of it is subject to the privacy laws. So it's not something that is necessarily easily accessed. So many stories are difficult to research, especially when it comes to the history side. Local history, by its very nature, is full of holes like a Swiss cheese. It's really hard to get answers to even sometimes very basic questions, just because sometimes the records don't exist. Another good example of that is in Kingston, where we talk about the burials and all the hangings that took place at the our old Frontenac County Courthouse and jail. One of the issues there is that because it was so old, because there's a lot of history in Kingston and a lot of it predates Confederation, a lot of records weren't even kept at that time. So when talking about 1830s, 1840s, or even things that happened in the 1790s, you're not necessarily going to have actually records of anything that's happened, because it wasn't really until Canada became a country that we sort of really made a big emphasis on tracking things like when we hanged people. So you have to kind of try to put together a puzzle with the history of some of these stories that is made of very incomplete pieces, and we just do our best to really make sure that we're giving you the accurate information that we can. And if something is a local legend or something that we've heard, we certainly make sure we make that clear as well. As far as the ghost side of things, certainly some of them can be more difficult to present. When the apparition, for example, is based around somebody who might have committed suicide, for example, there would be a case where, just out of sensitivity to the people involved, especially in stories that are of a more recent nature, we may choose not to include those. We may choose to not necessarily, I guess, focus on that aspect of it. You do want to make sure that we're not upsetting people in the group, and we always want to be respectful to the families of people that were involved in these stories that might be related to the ghosts in question. So there's a lot to it for sure, and for us, I think we're very careful to make sure that we pay respect to the people's stories that we're sharing on the tour. That's very important to us, both to them as well as any descendants they may have. I mean, I think if things are more than 50 years old, it certainly is a little bit easier, but more recent stories, for example, are something we might not really want to include at all.
Margot McDonald, I think, asked an interesting question. You've kind of made the decision not to give tours yourself anymore, which is quite a bit different from a lot of other ghost tours in Canada and around the world. Why did you make that decision? And do you miss giving the tours?
I certainly do miss giving the tours. It's a really exciting job. I mean, any one of us who does the tours, is so gratifying to have a group that's appreciative and listening to your stories, and being able to share that amazing experience with a group of people that you've just met is really fun. I mean, when I did do the tours in the first years, I would always get a lot out of it. I would certainly be invigorated. I found that when I got home afterward, I could never go to bed, for at least a couple, 2 or 3 hours afterward, just because I'd be too wired up with the excitement about how much fun it was to be doing that tour for a group of people. But I did know really early on that if I wanted to grow what we were doing and try to grow things beyond me, that I was going to have to make sure that I was able to hire and train, recruit some really awesome storytellers that were going to be able to, do the same thing, to be able to work as part of a team. And if it was always reliant upon me, then it could never outlast me, for one thing. But secondly, it put the business at tremendous risk as well as the experience at tremendous risk, because I would only ever be able to take so many people myself. There's no way, when you look at all the many dozens of skill groups we do on an average night in May or June, that just wouldn't be possible if I was trying to do a lot of these things myself. I also thought it was really important as well for the tour guides to be able to find their own voice. And I felt like if I was actively giving tours right alongside them, it would be very easy for everybody just to defer to my way of doing things. I think that by giving people their own freedom to do the tours without me directly being there next to them doing tours, it means that I'm able to serve as more of an editor that I think that just about every good business and certainly every performance needs, to have a director, an editor, somebody that's going to be able to kind of look at it from an outside perspective and be able to make improvements and suggest better ways of doing things. If you're too caught up in the performance yourself, sometimes it can be hard to see things from that perspective. So certainly there are many reasons. I certainly do miss doing tours. I do at the same time think it was one of the best decisions that I made for the Haunted Walk to really become what it has become today.
You mentioned being like an editor or a director. How often do the stories change on the tours?
It really depends on the story, how often they change. We do have some stories that just continually we get new developments, and we update stories as often as we get compelling new information. We actively go out and ask questions and go back and visit these places on a regular basis. Some of the places, like for example, say something like the Hostel Inn in Kingston, or that story that seems like there's something new every single year. Some great new juicy tidbit to add to the story. Or the Prince George Hotel, where we have newer encounters with the pub staff at the Tiernan Oak. Some of our stories, we continually, because they're places that are accessible to the public, they're places where there's just frequently brand new stories. But then there are other great stories where they have been almost unchanged since the beginning of the tour, because in some cases the story is just so great that we really don't want to mess with it. But also in some cases, if it's a story of something encounter that took place in the 1970s or a little bit earlier, and we like to have a mix of stories that are current versus stories that are older stories that might be well known. First of all, there may not be an opportunity to really change it or update it in some cases, just for practical reasons. But if it is a story that took place in the past, but what we always try to do is add new experiences, add new stories. We have a brand new story added. I think we have new stories added in all of our new content and added in all of our tours this year. We do update things every time that we get new information, and it's certainly one of the fun parts of it is to be able to see things evolve over time. Another way that we're always updating things is just simply by adding new experiences. We often find it's better to add a whole new tour if we can, with a whole lot of new content. Sometimes we want to make sure that we keep the favorite stories. So if we do change a story and take one off of one of our original Haunted Walks, for example, very frequently people say, "Oh no, that was my favorite story. How could you take that one off?" And everyone's tastes vary, so we try to make sure that we have enough new content to make sure when people come back, they're always going to hear new things. But we also just make an effort to actually create new tours. So we're always having new tour experiences and new things for people to experience, even if they've been on one of our tours before.
I think that ties into another question, which is what new things can folks look forward to experiencing this year?
Well, we're going to be doing a number of cool new things this year. We're certainly expanding our Haunted Walk experience tours that we get to do at Upper Canada Village, Mackenzie King Estate, as well as in Gananoque. as well, our time travel trail adventure was so popular in Ottawa, and we had so much fun doing that one that we have decided to start new time travel trail adventures in Kingston and in Toronto. We've also revamped the Ottawa one to add more of the interactive fun things that made it really popular last year, and it's been a huge amount of fun working on that tour. Getting to write, I love the cheeky sense of humor of that tour, the kind of the fun and wacky interactives. I love the very offbeat kind of look at local history that it gives, where you're getting to learn something about history, but it's such a funny, fast-paced, bizarre adventure that the group gets to experience, that I think that one's so much fun. I'm so happy to be able to expand that to Kingston and to Toronto as well. And we also have we've done our new websites as well for the Haunted Walk, but we have a new website as well for our time travel trail adventure, which is timetraveltrail.com.
Now, you just mentioned some of these new experiences. Do you think there's a tour on the roster that maybe is a little underrated and doesn't get the credit it deserves compared to some of the others?
I think, to me, the most underrated tour that we do is our tour of Gananoque. We have a Haunted Walk experience tour at Gananoque that it's a small town outside of Kingston, and not everybody will have necessarily heard of it or know very much about Gananoque. But it has the most bizarre history. It has such a varied and strange, weird history, as well as so many awesome, great ghost stories. I know that I myself, when I was asked to come and look at doing a tour in Gananoque, I was a little bit skeptical, just because I thought it's a very small town. How much history could it have? I knew that it would probably have some great stories, but would it have enough to really do a tour? Well, that tour has got some of the coolest stories. I mean, doing the research for it, we just kept getting blown away, one thing after another, that we would find out about this town, these great little stories of local history, as well as some really creepy stories. I mean, there's a couple of haunted houses or haunted buildings in that town that are some of the creepiest ones on our different tours. So I think our tour of Gananoque is one that maybe doesn't get all the attention because it's in a smaller community, but I'm happy we'll be running those on select evenings in the summer, and that's one I definitely think people should check out, especially if you've been on some of the other tours and you want to try something new. It's a really neat tour, and really happy with the quality of information we can give out on that one and how great the stories are.
Now, if you put yourself in the place of kind of an average customer, what do you think they would find most surprising about the behind-the-scenes elements of the Haunted Walk?
I think the thing that people would be most surprised by is just the amazing community of tour guides that we've formed over the years. How people it really is a family amongst us. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of businesses that would lay claim to that, but we still hang out with all of the tour guides that have worked here for, 15 years ago, or worked here 20 years ago, or worked here 10 years ago. They all still take a lot of pride in having worked for the Haunted Walk, whether they've moved on to other things, or in some cases people are certainly still here and still doing new tours and still doing awesome stuff with us. I think that we get to do a lot of fun things together. We do a lot of fun social events, but we also do a lot of community stuff. Like, we did our Wiggle Waggle Walkathon fundraiser for the Humane Society last year. We do charity walks as well. We do a lot of learning experiences too. And I think because it's such a unique job, people really do get very attached to having worked here. And it's really great seeing tour guides from the past that will come by. I think, probably in a lot of tourism in this type of job, a lot of times I think it may be just pretty much just students that are kind of still remain a part of it. And maybe they have fond memories of it, but may not stay involved. But with us, we really find that people stay involved for a really long time, often well beyond when they may be students. And in whether they still work for us or whether they still actually do tours on a regular basis, so many of them will contact us to talk about new things we're doing, or through social media, or through or just to come in directly into the office to come and drop by and say hello. We've gotten to see tour guides as they've had children, or they've had new things going on in their life, and gotten to come in back and come and speak to us. So I think is one of the things I'm most proud of, is just how really we have such a great kind of community of people that have worked on the tours over the years and that are so excited to see things, even sometimes 10 years after they've actually even done a tour here.
A question that we got from both Amber Eden and Carbon Lilies was they were very curious and I think a little hopeful to know, are you planning to expand the Haunted Walk to any other locations or cities?
Well, expanding to a new city is a huge job for sure. I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but there's no immediate plans to expand to any additional cities, certainly not this year at least. But I'm really happy with the new program we have of the Haunted Walk experience, where we're getting to do tours on a more limited run basis at some of the really cool sites. Like, I loved doing stuff at Upper Canada Village last year. Such a creepy place to be able to go around at night. Pitch black there. We all have flashlights or going by lantern light, and getting to just explore this really creepy old pioneer village kind of atmosphere. As well, we had Mackenzie King Estate, where what an amazing history to that place, as well as a really creepy atmosphere. And getting to do there, explore those places. It's a really good way for us to be able to visit some places that maybe wouldn't be able to sustain a tour going year round, but it's something we can do for our fans that have come and done all of our tours, and they want to see something new. They want to do new stuff and be able to have some adventures in some really cool locations. I think that's something we're going to expand a lot in the future. I'd love to do some sites around Toronto, around Kingston. I'd like to do some more sites and explore, because we have so many great opportunities to do smaller places like Gananoque, and really find out a bit more about their unique history, tell their unique stories. And I find every place is so different. It's always fun to learn more about the places. And even though we can kind of have a theme that's going to be familiar with our haunted walks, but doing them in different locations completely changes everything. And I think it's satisfying, it's fun, it gives us new things to do, and we're going to expand that in the future. We're going to go to as many sites as we can that have a great haunted history to them.
We got a really excellent question from John Buffum, one of our good friends from Bytown Paranormal. And he's interested to know that after 20 successful years, has your opinion on whether ghosts are real, has that changed at all, or has your perspective evolved as to what you think ghosts are and if they're real?
Well, John, I love the question of whether ghosts are real. I remember listening to John Robert Colombo, a famous author of Canadian ghost compilations, and he was talking, and he said that ghosts in many ways are not a matter of belief, they're a matter of experience. And I think for me that certainly has held to be true. I will say that I have a skeptical nature, and certainly anybody who knows me knows that that's true. I certainly am a natural skeptic. However, I've had so many weird things happen to me, and it's more than just that. I've spoken to so many credible witnesses who 100% are telling the truth about things that they've witnessed or things that have happened to them. I've had stories where I've done investigations and had corroborating evidence that it would be impossible to, nobody can make this stuff up. When people don't even know each other are telling you the exact same story, they've never heard anything about the building, they've never heard anyone else talk about it. It's pretty hard to just discard that as being, made up or untrue in any way. So I think I would separate my natural tendencies to be skeptical person with the fact that I've had experiences all through my life that kind of lead me in the opposite direction. So I think I feel like a lot of our customers do that come on the tour, where I'm not really sure. I think in many ways that the mystery is the whole point. To me, I think that what's fun about it is wondering. I almost would never want to know the answers to some of these questions, because it's just too fun to kind of wonder what is going on. What could explain some of the things that have happened at these places, or some of the experiences that people have shared with us. So I know, John, that I think you may share some of those views with me, but I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think that's a lot of what makes it fun for most of us, is we just kind of want to be able to explore that unexplained a little bit and see some glimpses of what could be there. But I think that anybody who tells you that they know exactly whether ghosts are real or not is probably either trying to sell you something or is deluding themselves.
Our final question comes from Jason, one of our good friends at Segway Up Ontario in Toronto. And he asks a great question, and that is, if you had to do it all over again, would you do anything differently?
And Jason, I think I know that as a fellow person in the tour business, I imagine you'd probably feel the same way about it as I do, which is that, sure, you can look back and think about plenty of mistakes that you've made along the way, or things that you maybe, could have done differently. But I like to think that every time that I've made a mistake in running this business, I've learned something as a result. And I think the thing is that making those mistakes, if I wasn't to make those would still be out there waiting for me. So it's good to get some of those mistakes out of the way, learn from them, and be able to run a better business as a result. So I think in terms of the business, I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes, no doubt about that. But I think that I've learned from all of them, and that I think as long as you're always continually trying to get better, I think we take it really seriously as well. All of us here at the Haunted Walk take it seriously, whether you're doing tours or whether you're designing, a scheduling system or whatever we may need to do in order to make the business work. I think it's important to allow yourself the flexibility to work really hard, but to allow that no matter how hard you work, that there are some mistakes here still going to happen, or some things you just have to try to find out whether they work or not. And I think it's always important to be striving to get better. And so I guess, I mean, it is my honest answer that I think that I wouldn't really change anything, because the things that have gone wrong have all been things I've learned from. If I hadn't have done those, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to learn. I think one good example of one of the mistakes I might have learned a lot of things from is very early on. I expanded quite quickly. We expanded, to Ottawa in 1996, and then to Victoria. For 3 years, we had a tour in Victoria, BC. Now, this was partly just out of necessity. I was living for a few years out in BC and thought it would be great to do a tour out there. Well, one thing that I quickly learned is that you really need to have lots of good local people that are really kind of integrated into the community, that know a lot about the heritage community and can help you get the stories and also the support. I think in Victoria things went fine, but I don't necessarily feel like we managed to kind of get as involved into that community as I would have liked. So I think the great thing about having done that was it was a great lesson learned, maybe trying to move a little too fast. And also I think I learned a lot of lessons about how to delegate, how to make sure that everybody was speaking the same language, because I had businesses, across the country where I wasn't able to be there all the time. So I needed to make sure that we developed great systems, great ways of doing things to make sure that we were all on the same page. We really took those lessons when we expanded in the last few years to Toronto. So expanded very quickly to a third city in within a couple years. But then after scaling that back, it took us a good, 15 years or so before we decided to move to another big city. In Toronto, we made sure I had a manager I knew well, Rowena, who's done a fantastic job. She really integrated herself. She was already living in Toronto, working together, already knew a lot of people in heritage and in tourism, and was able to really get to the heart of some of the great stories. And Rowena and I worked together to really make sure that we did it right, so that we were going to be a part of Toronto, a part of the heritage community. We were going to work with lots of partners, and we were going to really make sure and do it right. And I think we've done a great job. Toronto's grown like crazy, but more than that, I think we're really proud of the awesome tours that we have in that city. getting to do stuff by working with our friends, like yourselves at Segway of Ontario in the distillery district. What a cool place that is to be able, and a real pleasure to be able to do ghost stories there, as well as some of the kind of classic ghost stories of Toronto as well. And I think what's great about being kind of investing the time and investing lots of time in research and trying to make sure that everybody knows this and that we know we'll work with as many people as possible, is that I think it's going to be a lot more lasting of an experiment. In Toronto, it's been very popular and is probably the fastest growing part of our company right now. So out of my earlier mistake with Victoria of expanding too fast and maybe not putting enough thought into how to integrate everything with partnerships, etc., doing the exact opposite in Toronto has really paid off.
Having been in the business for 20 years now, very successfully, looking ahead for the next 20 years, what kind of things are on your mind, on the horizon, that you'd like to take on?
I think there's endless places to... I just, everywhere I travel, I enjoy going on ghost tours. So I think there's really no limit to, how many cool places we could get to go to, how many great partnerships that we can how many we could form or be able to work with other people. I love working with other businesses. I love being able to help people get better at what they do as well. And I think so. I have no idea where we're going to go in the next 20 years, but I know it's going to be fun, and I know that we're going to have a great time doing it. And I feel very confident that we will continue to do new things, and we're never going to get lazy or complacent. I think that's really important, and I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Glenn. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Just a really big thank you to Glenn for making the time to speak with us, and a big thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this first episode. Please be sure to visit our website, hauntedwalk.com, and you can subscribe to our social media channels through there, and definitely subscribe to the show through iTunes, and of course, we're always happy for great reviews. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.